what's up, y'all? This is my preamble to my evidence and proof of God and why the Bible is true video. The first thing I'm going to do is give a preamble of my personal thoughts that basically present all the flaws in what we call science, all of the ignoring of self-evident truths and logic we ignore every day. Now, it's interesting that the first place the unbelieving community goes is they question why there's evil in the world and the detriment of what they call the church, which is very unbiblical, and how that has negatively impacted society, particularly the black community. Now, I'm going to hit all those topics. But for the unbelievers who want to throw out the Bible, it's interesting that if you believe there's no God, then you are, apparently admitting to that you're an animal. And if we're animals, or chemical reactions that are predetermined by how the chemicals react in our bodies, then what is truth? And how can you draw a moral standard based on something that's predetermined by chemical reactions? Specifically animal behavior. Now, if you look at all the atrocities in the world and the poor condition of the black community, there's more evidence to prove that rejecting a biblical God and ignoring his principles and the laws of logic and reason that are presented in his word and are basically ascribed into our hearts and minds is the reason why there's so much evil and there's so much confusion among the societies and particularly the black community. The ills that particularly destroy the black community and all the societies are people giving into their selfish desires, our unbridled lack of self-control with lust, undisciplined mental behavior that comes with greed. Again, these are all things that the Bible speaks against and exposes as the corrupt human nature that we should not be led by. People don't want to understand and admit that their flesh is where all the corruption of life exists. That all the ills and all the hurt and all the pain of life is caused by people yielding to their flesh and rejecting the spiritual principles that come from knowing of a creator that is personal and that is giving us a revealed word and his spirit to keep our flesh in proper subjection. All of the ethics and all the values that go to productivity, that morality, will not come from admitting that you're an animal. Drawing a standard of morality to determine truth, right and wrong, good or bad, cannot exist if you believe that you're just chemicals reacting and that you are somehow predetermined to exist a certain way and that you are admitting that you have no free will. Now, I know people will bring up free will, and I've done a video on free will before. And I tell anyone, I challenge anyone, explain to me how life can exist without choice. Choices, by definition, are the very evidence that you are alive. If you were not making choices, there will be no proof that you exist. The reflection of the choices you make prove your existence. And people will say, well, if God is omnipotent and he's all-knowing and omniscient and all these things, then how do we have free will? That's very simple. God knows the beginning of the end. Just because he knows how everything's going to play out doesn't stop us from existing in real time to make choices. He just already knows the choices that we're going to make, but that does not take responsibility for us to choose the best choices to stay in favor with him and protect ourselves. And that comes from personal responsibility. Again, another biblical principle that being an animal or being bacteria or some predetermined chemical reactions will not show. So My preamble is just to basically question the non-believing community, because they trust in science. They trust in all of these things. Science is all theory. Science, evolution, Big Bang Theory, all of those have been proven false. And most of the precepts that the unbelieving community stand on cannot be are not repeatable and testable according to the scientific method. You're just trusting what science says on faith. And for those who believe that a man wrote it, you name one thing that a man did not write. And let me give you an example. If I'm writing and I'm using a pen, and the pen is the instrument that I use to communicate a message, who is writing, me or the pen? And likewise with God. God uses us who are made in his image to reveal himself and project his attributes and his knowledge. And if God is using a man and speaking through him, who is speaking, the man or God? The very breath that we have within us is not our own. It belongs to him. We are made in his image. The uniformity and logic and reason of life are ascribed to our hearts and minds and our souls, which is why we inherently do draw a universal moral standard of right and wrong and good or bad. And we prove this by complaining and drawing standards of expectation to how we want to be treated, and when we reject to the treatment of others. This cannot come from animal behavior. So all of the ills and all the atrocities of humanity and all of the things, for those who believe there is no God, then you're just admitting that human nature in itself is self-destructive, and there's no point, because if you self-declare that you are nothing, that you are just a chemical reacting from a primordial mix that somehow in a way you can't explain or have no proof to show came into existence, then what is your meaning of life, and what is the value of complaining about anything? Because everybody's predetermined, because they're just chemicals, right? This is just animal behavior. In the jungle, there is no reason and logic to predetermined behavior. People are just doing what they're hardwired to doing in a society where there is no God, so therefore there is no complaining and there is no objection. Now, it's funny how all the people who are against a God cannot prove any evidence to show for the things that they build their scientific case. They always say, well, show me objective evidence. Show me empirical evidence of there is a God. Well, first of all, biblically, the Bible has pretty much 1,000 prophecies that have already been fulfilled to the T of how it was predicted to be fulfilled. And many things the Bible has said thousands of years ago are geographically accurate in existing secular history, which means that even the non-believing atheistic community will attest to many of the things that the Bible has spoken of. And I get what people are going to say, well, the Bible has, they mix truth in with the things they made up. Not true. Because the Bible actually has a uniform, consistent thread of truth starting from the beginning and the end that holds together the meaning of life and how everything interplays and correlates and corresponds to the other. It is very practical and it's very logical if you understand the Bible from an unbiased, open-minded view, which many don't. Because many just want to object to the Bible to promote their own selfish behavior, even at the expense and the detriments of their personal communities, their families, and just adding to the evils in the world. Adhering to biblical principles and biblical commandments will actually expose the darkness and evil of the world. For those who believe white supremacy and slavery are atrocities, first of all, the Bible never condoned slavery. It was an act, that if the type of slavery that people think of, that was the penalty was a death penalty. When they say servants, and when they say servants that worked off debt, that's basically, if you think of the children of Israel living in a closed community where God is their government, they had to adhere to principles and adhere to a code to keep their society clean and pure. Now, it's no different from us having bosses, from us having employers and employee relationships. That's pretty much master and slave. That's pretty much you working for somebody else to provide a life for yourself. It's just different times and different circumstances and different words. But the concept is very much the same. We just are more, I guess we deceive ourselves more about what things really are, because we have to lie to ourselves to feel good in our existence in this world, which is very oppressive by many people's own admission. So, it's just so many holes in why people want to question God, because again, no one can complain about anything if everyone is predetermined and a result of just chemicals reacting, and we are just inorganic material that coalesced into organic material by means and processes that no atheistic scientific mind can explain nor justify. And if there is a God, and most people are really just agnostic, meaning that no one can determine the God, then that presents another issue, because if we are the result of a creator, we need to know who he is and what our purpose in him is, and that has an eternal consequence. Because our creator is a spirit, we all have spirits, and that has eternal consequences. So it's not something that you can just say, well, no one knows who God is. God has revealed himself in your minds. The Bible is basically ascribed into everyone's conscience, everyone's heart. Every religion does not give the basic fundamental questions that everyone needs to know. They don't. And the Bible is the only religion of grace. Every other religion is of works, meaning that it is to build yourself up, knowing that we fail and that we are slaves to a nature that is contrary to our very peace of mind, to our very way of getting along with one another. So basically, in the Bible, God has solved our problem for us by having a higher standard to bring us into his presence himself. When we have evidence that we fail every day and we fall short of meeting the standard that we all hope to be treated by, God solves that problem by making himself available to us, by giving us grace over our own failed, proven limitations through our own experiences, to bring us into his presence, to recreate us back into his image, where our hearts and minds are in sync and rebalanced, to adhere to his will, to avoid all the things that we hate in life, and to expose the darkness that many complain and lose their faith over. So this is just a preamble, a long one, but I had to go. I'm off the cuff right now, so this is a subject where I need to address very methodically and very specifically. So stay tuned.